Life is difficult. I think almost everyone recognizes this line from the road less traveled. What we usually miss, however, is that 4 paragraphs later, the psychiatrist M. Scott Peck continued, "Life is a series of problems. Do you want to moan about them or solve them?" In the next 15 minutes or so, I will talk about the problem-solving mode. By the problem-solving mode, I mean a social science approach focused on solving a problem. It is a special quality of knowledge mobilization in which a social scientist consciously contributes towards making institutions and systems fulfill their functions. The social scientist thus offers not only analysis but practical results, and to offer practical results is to solve a problem. What does solving a problem entail? In 1996, Open the Social Sciences was published. The multidisciplinary Gulbenkian Commission, led by sociologist Emanuel Wallerstein, proposed to open the social sciences to other disciplines as well as affirmed the central role of the social sciences in the contextualization of universalisms. In the problem-solving mode that I am promoting, I use many of the ideas of the sociologist Michael Burawoy along with the ideas of the Gulbenkian Commission. Thus, contextualization of universalisms is about uncovering the plurality of particularism and opening up the social sciences to other disciplines, or interdisciplinarity is about generating different types of knowledge. Burawoy identified 4 types of knowledge that define a scientific field, be it in anthropology, economics, history, political science, psychology, or sociology. These 4 types correspond to 2 questions that provide a necessary foundation for the practice and project of the social sciences. Knowledge for whom? Knowledge for what? In the context of scientific production, we ask, first, whether knowledge is for an academic audience or an extra-academic audience. We ask, second, whether knowledge is to be used in determining the appropriate means to pursue a given end, or whether it involves a discussion of those very ends themselves. That is, whether knowledge is instrumental or whether it is reflexive. So there are 4 types of knowledge. Professional knowledge is instrumental knowledge that is aimed at an academic audience. Policy knowledge is instrumental knowledge, which is aimed at the extra-academic audience. Critical knowledge is reflexive knowledge produced with the community of scholars. And public knowledge is reflexive knowledge for an extra-academic audience. Let's take a closer look at these 4 types of knowledge that define any scientific field. Professional knowledge serves towards resolving anomalies and contradictions in research projects based on assumptions, questions, methodologies, and theories. Policy knowledge is knowledge addressing problems defined by clients. Both are instrumental knowledge because they aim at making things work. The 3rd type of knowledge is critical knowledge. Critical knowledge is opening up assumptions for discussion and debate within the community of scholars. Public knowledge results from the dialogue between the scholar and the non-academic public around societal goals and the means for achieving these goals. Both are reflexive knowledge as they examine the value relevance of our scientific projects. The Filipino social scientist is expected to participate in the production and utilization of these 4 types of knowledge. The Filipino social scientist usually does so with a particular claim of epistemic privilege and authority. Usually, this is a claim based on assumptions that one's social location, especially in the situatedness in specific social relations, endows one with insights and perspectives about particular problems or issues that may not be available to anyone from a different social location. At the same time, however, it also assumes that the social location of the Filipino social scientist is characterized by exteriority. The various expectations of exteriority vis-a-vis the object-subject of study flow from the conventional and more prevalent practice in the social sciences to follow the protocols of modern science that are anchored, among others, on objectivity. Objectivity, an expression of universalism, was viewed, for example, by the sociologist of science, Robert Merton, to preclude particularism, which then requires the scientist to cut all personal relations with the object-subject of study and be oblivious of its condition and context. However, it is difficult, if not impossible, for the social sciences to be value-neutral or context-free, as both object and subject of study are embedded in personal, social, and institutional relationships. In the social sciences, scientific inquiry becomes a way of caring for one's own society at the very start. To resolve the claim of epistemic privilege and exteriority, the Filipino social scientist must consciously reclaim one's local rootedness as well as one's professional training as a critical, distant observer of this society. In the problem-solving mode, the distinctions between the outsider as critical distant, opening up everything for discussion and debate, following a scholarly tradition, but may be oblivious of context and particularities, and insider, someone possessing knowledge of the local manifestations of universalized processes, but may not be critical distant, are to be erased. The problem-solving mode urges social scientists to be critical of, but yet part of the system as one tries to solve a problem. The outsider thus joins forces with the insider as the social scientist moves from being critical distant to being socially embedded and then back again. The problem-solving mode has multiple interpretations. I arrive at it from the angle of development consultancies. 6 years ago in Bielefeld University, where I earned my doctorate in development sociology, I gave a lecture on surprise, or non-knowledge, and its role in the pilot implementation of a World Bank-supported community-driven development project in the Philippines. At the end of that lecture, I was asked why I seem uncritical of the World Bank, as any academic is assumed to be. Because many social development institutions now see interdisciplinarity and data-driven actions as socially desirable, many social development projects are now embedded in organized social science research in universities. Consequently, many academics like me find work as short-term consultants in international development projects. Consultancies with controversial international development institutions such as the World Bank, are probably the biggest source of dilemma for social scientists. This arrangement is problematic amidst expectations for the academic to be critical of the World Bank's role in promoting neoliberal and structural adjustment policies, that prioritizing economic growth and market forces in development exacted a heavy cost on human well-being. Yet, these assignments are opportunities for the social scientists to work with international development partners in a problem-solving mode. Let me explain a bit or give an example about how I use the problem-solving mode. In 2013, I led a research team from the Institute of Philippine Culture, a multidisciplinary research center of the Ateneo de Manila University, in conducting a process-oriented evaluation of the livelihoods for vulnerable urban communities, a community-driven development project that the Philippine government undertook with technical assistance from the World Bank. The goal of that study was to co-produce knowledge that the World Bank and the Department of Social Welfare and Development could use to inform the scale-up of the project. Our study of the implementation of the LVUC project shows instances where the contextualization of universalisms is needed before so-called development interventions to institutions and systems could fully work. The social scientist who is on a problem-solving mode is called to be critical and be an insider at the same time, as he or she mobilizes professional, policy, critical, and public knowledge. Professional knowledge or technical knowledge sensitize those in the research team to the necessity of the modern state recognizing and accepting traditional knowledge. These are insights we learn in political science, in sociology and anthropology, even in psychology and economics. Any development project in the Philippines unavoidably interfaces with our hybrid culture. But the professional knowledge incorporated in project design is typically tested and accepted knowledge. Knowledge that is filtered down to general principles that end up conforming to a common norm, the common norm of rationality, efficiency, regardless of local, social, and cultural differences. Critical knowledge is needed here so that the project design will recognize this hybrid culture. For example, the initial project design includes a disbursement system involving check payments, which makes sense in a modern accounting and auditing system and with larger amounts. However, do not work in the context where most payments are done by cash. Project implementers therefore thus introduce a provision of cash advances for expenses less than 10,000 pesos when suppliers refuse to accept check payments for small transactions such as the daily purchase of perishable goods for the food processing training, some of which cost less than 100 pesos. Participatory approaches have relied mainly on the voluntary participation of women, a reliance that often results in additional burdens to women at home and in the community. Preventing a development project from being an unintended burden to women requires the mobilization not only of professional and critical knowledge, but also public knowledge towards the inclusion of men and boys in the project. This can start with information and communication efforts to make men participate in this project themselves, or at least support changes in the household division of labor that would free up time for women to work in these projects. However, questioning the assumption that the poor have the luxury of unpaid voluntary labor can only be scaled up via policy knowledge so that the government and development institutions will change their definitions of community participation. In reply to the question that I was asked at the end of my 2015 lecture in Bielefeld University, I had given the following answer. The work of local academics in international donor-assisted development projects in the Philippines shows that in spaces where many institutions are in varying forms of maturity, our goal should be not only offer a critique, but to also solve a problem. One cannot be infinitely critical if one is trying to solve a problem. My construction of the problem-solving mode argues that in contexts where institutions and systems are well established, or in purely theoretical settings, social scientists can be infinitely critical. For many social scientists and observers in Western societies whose institutions and systems have already matured, the divisions and debates surrounding the subject-object of study may appear to have been resolved on the side of being critical. Social scientists in Europe and North America can stay in the critical mode since they can expect institutions to make things work, and the more mature and political social institutions in these social spaces do work most of the time. However, in spaces such as in the Philippines, where many institutions are in varying forms of maturity, our goal should be not only to offer a critique, but to also solve a problem. I utilized Burawoy's 4 types of knowledge as the elements of the problem-solving mode, which requires the social scientist to be simultaneously practical and critical. I agree with some scholars who said that the social sciences are positioned in between the natural sciences, which emphasize instrumental knowledge, and the humanities, which is focused on reflexive knowledge. That is the strength of the social sciences. Nonetheless, the problem-solving mode itself is a position that is as problematic as any other position. Who defines the problem, and how can it be solved? How does power operate at the very instance of defining a problem? these difficult questions will remain. However, with many problems waiting to be solved in the Philippines, the social scientists must move from reflexive analysis and critique to the enactment of ideas. Going back to M. Scott Peck's questions, life is a series of problems. Do we want to moan about them or solve them?